Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Mike at Filmboy24. Kind of caught me off guard there, which is weird because I'm filming myself. So if you think you knew a lot about the Kodak Brownie 88 or regular 8mm movie camera before this video, stay tuned. You're probably going to know a tiny bit less when it's all said and done. Okay, so hopefully you don't know less when this video is over, and maybe your knowledge base in these cameras is a tiny bit higher. We'll see. What we're talking about today, we got some things back there to show you too, is this little gem, this little piece of art that you can find at just about every junk sale in town. They're not rare. They're everywhere. They're all over the internet. And yes, it is the classic Kodak Brownie 8mm movie camera. I know most of you are probably familiar with Brownie and their old school from, really early 1900s still film cameras. I think they came out actually in 1900. But they also did and branded the 8mm Brownie. This particular one that we're going to talk about today for a few minutes is the Brownie Model 3. Now, the Model 3 came a couple of different ways. It came like this example that I have here, this beauty here. It also came in a 3-lens turret version, which is basically had 3 lenses on the front, a wide angle, a normal, and a telephoto. And you would just kind of pull it and twist it, and whichever one fell into place in front of the gate, that's the one you were using. Well, with this one, all metal body construction with its sort of, like faux plasticky leatherette look to it. This one has a single lens and it's fixed. There's no focusing, there's no removing it. So don't try or you'll cake the camera. So this is a 13mm fixed lens, Kodak's little, their own branded lens. It's an extremely simple to use camera. Not terrible optics for a camera that is 60 to 70 years old. These were very popular in the 50s and 60s. Now, getting right into things, it will only shoot at 16 frames per second. So if you're looking for something that'll go a tad bit higher, I typically shoot in 24 frames per second, no matter what cine film I'm using. But occasionally I like to step it down a little bit and do 16 or 18, depending on the format. Well, this one will only do 16. That's not that big of a deal, though. It actually gives you a lot more filming time. You see, when you used to buy 8mm or 88 roll film, which is what this takes, it would come, it's like this, kind of, which is what I use today. This is a very, very old roll of Kodak Tri-X 7278. Now, this particular roll in my hand was manufactured in 1974, this actual roll. And I know that because there was a date code on the edge after I was finished shooting it. And I didn't know that until I actually was done shooting it, but I figured what better way to test a 60 or 70-year-old camera than with a 50-year-old roll of film. I shoot a lot of expired or past its process before date film. This one here, I just wanted to show you, when you get old film, a lot of this old stuff, this 88 film, it would come in these little metal canisters. This one was so old and likely not ideally stored that it was real difficult to get the little tin open. It was kind of rusted shut, and I had to kind of fingernail it, and scoot the lid off of the top. I don't know why that's relevant, but I'm just trying to explain to you just how old this film really was. Now, if you're new to my channel, I shoot, process, and scan all of my own cine film. I do it because I just love the process. I love to process, and I do love the process. I don't get lab results. I get Filmboy24 results, which I'm okay with. I do try to get a little bit better every time I do it. I've been doing it for several years now. I have been involved with film in some facet or another for the better part of 40 plus years. Anyway, this is where we're at now. So back to this little camera, the one that you can probably pick up at just about every thrift store that you go to. Should you get it? Well, if it's reasonably priced, yes. My example here, I picked up at my local flea market in a little antique building there, and it's in, I got to tell you, like new condition, which is kind of difficult to find nowadays in these old cameras. I paid $20 US for this camera out the door. Now, that's probably about the max you want to pay, somewhere $20 to $30. I was okay doing that. First, it was local here. I could just grab it. I could check it out. And second, I could see that it's rarely been used. I mean, there really isn't a scratch on it. So I was happy with that. So let's get back into the nuts and bolts of it. It's a very simple camera. It is a wind-up, like a spring clock motored camera. So what you do is this little hand crank right here on the side, and I'll give you close-ups. You know I like to do that. You just turn it clockwise, a whole bunch of turns, and it'll stop when it's done turning. Of course it will. It'll stop when it's fully wound. That's what I should say. I can't remember how many times it takes to turn it. There it is. It stopped. You don't want to turn it. You don't want to force it because then you end up breaking things in there. You will get between 30 and 40 seconds of continuous runtime out of one complete wind. And I say 30 to 40 seconds. Some cameras perform a little bit different than others. It depends on their life, how they live their life. To shoot, there's the little shutter button right here on the front, right on the bottom, this little black switch thingy-majig. And it's got a fun little shape to it that your finger can just rest on. Now, to manually shoot and let go and it stops, you just push it in, straight in. You hear that? That's the camera rolling. To run lock, you push in and pull down. Then you let go, and now what the... Now we're in the action. Hey, how you doing? So they did this because it's continuous run and people could jump out in front of their own movies. And you could do that for 30 or 40 seconds. To release, you just simply push it back up and now you're good to go. Well, right next to that little run lock button there is your footage counter. It starts at around 25-ish, a little bit more. When you buy film back in the olden days, you got about 33 feet of film on there because they put a leader on the front and the back of the film. And usually you'd pull a foot or two off when you're loading and then flip and you do the same thing on the other end. So you're going to lose some film that way. So they give you a little extra. But this says 25 and it counts down to a big fat 0. So what you're really supposed to do is load your film, run it, and you run it until your counter reaches 25. When it reaches 25, you're good to go. And what it does is it pulls in some of that film that got exposed when you were loading, because you can load this in dimly lit light. You don't want to, do it in, I have 9 lights going right now. You don't want to do it right here, but you can kind of cover it with your body and load it. We're going to load it in just a second. I'll show you. So you run it until it gets down to 0. And a lot of times, even if you've run one of these long enough, you can kind of hear the film unclick from the roller. So you know when it's finished. If you're not sure if you've shot 25 feet-ish or not, and you want to check, don't do it in the daylight. Either do it in a bag, a dark bag, or in a dark room, or somewhere very dark that you're not going to ruin all of your roll. And then you pop this door open, check it, or even just feel if the film hasn't pulled completely off. That's a good way to find out. It's not a reflex camera. It has this viewfinder on top. Now this kind of closes down for the sleek aerodynamic look. But if you're going to film with it, you have to pop the front one and the back one up. Now this is what they call a parallax viewfinder, because the image that you see when you look through here is not exactly what the lens sees. As you can see, they're not on the same, well, they're on the same plane, but they're not, they're not equal. But they also have these little rings on the front of the viewfinder. You see, this is where you look through in the back, and I'll give you a close-up. And then you see these colored rings. Now, the standard lens on this camera, and it's an f1.9, we'll get into that in just a second, is a 13 millimeter. So if you're going to use just this standard lens right here, you look through the viewfinder and you frame everything inside the red, which is the middle one. Now, there are little hash marks, there's like little pointers at the top of each one of these little frames. If you're going to do close-up work, anything, typically it's different for each adapter because you can screw on a wide angle or telephoto on the front of this. They got 9, this is 13, and then I have a 24, what they call a close-up lens or a telephoto lens. That's what the green, the red, and the yellow are. The yellow is the telephoto because that kind of zooms in. So you want to frame everything inside that yellow. So if you're using the 24mm adapter, you frame everything within the yellow. The 13mm lens, which is standard, frame everything in the red. Or if you're using the wide angle attachment, you frame everything in the green. Now, if you're doing close-up, like I started to talk about a minute ago, in other words, if the camera is within, I think, 3 to 5 feet of your subject and you're using this lens, you want your frame, the top of your frame, to be at that hash mark or that little break in the frame at the top. I'll give you a close-up there so you can see. And each one of those frames has their own. So if the camera is pushed in close, you want to frame that way. That's because the closer you are, the more off these two are going to be. If I'm pointing the camera at the ring on my finger right there, well, I'm looking through and I'm seeing the knuckles or the creases in my hand. So you want everything to be a tad bit lowerly framed. Anyway, I know I got off on that a little bit, but it's really not that difficult. Speaking of the f-stops on this lens, there's a little dial right here on the side, and this is what changes your f-stops. You just rotate it right here. We'll give you a little close-up, but you rotate it, and it changes. Basically, all it really does is there's a disc inside here. There's a big disc, and it's got different size holes in it. With most modern cameras and camera lenses now, when you adjust the f-stop, there is a diaphragm in there made up with a whole bunch of little plates, and they sort of expand and contract to let more or less light in. This system is just a giant wheel inside here that throws a different size circle in front of the lens. So it lets in more or less light. The higher the f-stop number, the smaller the hole or less amount of light that's going to go in. This goes from f1.9 all the way up to f16, and it also has half stops everywhere in between. So if you want f14, you can get around f14. There's a little line or a little dot in between 11 and 16. Like I said earlier, it runs only at 16 frames per second. And it also has a little tripod adapter, a little 1/4-20 female adapter right there on the bottom so you can mount to a tripod. You can't do single frame in this unless, I guess, you could really figure out how to do it one frame at a time. It's not really designed for that. The shutter speed that you want to use is around 1/32nd, or it's easiest just to probably call it 1/30th of a second. Now there's a little dial right here on the front of the camera. It's a little antiquated. Back in the olden days, the days of this was considered a very fast speed film that I shot. This was ISO 200. But for the most part, people, when they shot with these cameras, they used film that was very low ISO. So it needed a lot of exposure, or a lot of light, I should say. So although this gauge is fun to look at, it's not really that relevant to today's films. You want to meter your film. This has not got auto exposure, so you need to get your little light meter or a light meter app on your phone, and you want to use 1/30th of a second as your shutter speed, and then it'll give you your f-stop and you're good to go. But you want to set everything manually, and you want to use a light meter to get it right. Now, there's instances where a light meter is going to get you close, but it's not going to get you dead on, and that's kind of what happened with me. Because I have a little sample reel I'm going to show you guys in just a second. But I metered each shot. I shot it at 100 ISO, or I metered at 100 ISO. But there are a lot of times where that still wasn't enough. I didn't know how old this film actually was, but I should have probably metered everything at around 40 ISO just to be safe. Just to be safe. I don't know. So there's a little bit of, there's some little underexposure here and there. We're going to show you a couple of things. I want to show you this film that I shot with this camera. And I also want to show you how to load the camera. We're going to open it up, but I'm going to show you the film first. Then we're going to load the camera up with some dummy film, and then we're going to wrap it up. So here's the film that I shot, the black and white film, at a little park with my wife right now. And there you have it. Like I said, there's some underexposure. There's just a few issues. But overall, for a film that's 50 years old, I'm cool with it. You know, I'm cool. It's 8mm. It's a tiny little frame size. So as you may or may not know, 8mm or double 8 or regular 8 or whatever you want to call it, it's just 8mm film, not Super 8, because it's a different sprocket pattern and the frame is a tiny bit bigger. But it always starts out as 16mm film. It's 16mm wide right here. It's got the exact same sprocket holes as 16mm film, except it's got twice as many. So theoretically, yes, you could run 8mm double 8 film like this through a 16mm camera, and it should work relatively well. So there's a couple of different ways that you can scan this. You can scan it, you can cut it first, which is slice it right down the middle, and then splice it together to make 50 feet, or a little more than 50 feet typically. Or you can scan it whole, and when you scan it whole without cutting it, you get both sides of the film at the same time. And I'm showing you right now on the screen what I'm talking about. I prefer to split the film, even though it's kind of a pain, but I prefer to split the film first, splice it together, scan it as an 8mm wide film, and get what you guys saw earlier. To do that, you have to use a little device like this. Something similar to this. This is made by Lomo. It's a splitter, a film splitter. And you feed your 16mm film, 16mm wide double 8 film, into one side. And I'll give you a little close up and show you exactly what you do to get this cut. And you pull it right through and it splits it as you go. And then when you're all finished with it, well, this is what you end up with. Half of your 16mm, which is 8mm, just like that. And you splice the two halves together and you can scan it or do whatever you want with it. If it's reversal, you can project it. So as far as the camera itself, what you do, you kind of push in the little button here on the side. And by the way, this little diagram here on the side of the camera, that's made for old Kodachrome. Pretty much you can ignore all of this guideline right here on the side of the camera. So you push in and kind of slide this lever to the back, and you pop this off. You pop the side of the camera off. Now your camera should have a film reel in it when you get it. Typically, once there's a reel in there, it needs to stay with the camera, and it would be your take-up reel. Now I'm going to give you a close-up of loading this camera and show you just how easy it really is. With a dummy roll of film, I have an old roll of film that's been exposed 1,000,000 times to light. So here's a little close-up and we'll show you exactly what you're in for. Okay guys, so what you want to do first is make sure you have a take-up reel and your supply reel or your fresh film. Now remember, this has already been exposed, so doing this in the light to show you isn't going to hurt it, but this all has to be done in kind of a dimly lit area if you don't want to expose too much of your film. Now these are daylight spools, which means light doesn't get through here, so it's only going to burn and ruin the film, typically on the outside, maybe the second layer deep, but be careful, try to do it in the dim light. So like I said earlier, you kind of push down here and you slide the lock button and you just open the back, or the side of the camera. Now, inside you have two spools. This is where your fresh film goes, and it says right here on it, full film, empty film. Now the reason I have two take-up ones here is to show you that there actually is a difference. This here, you want to be cautious. Do you see the pattern on the whole pattern there? It's like a 4, like a plus sign. And you flip it over and it's the same. It's like a plus sign. Well, if you have one of these that's the same on both sides, it's not going to fit here on your take-up or on your full spool here. These don't work on full. So if you're spooling your own film, you don't want to use one that has the plus on both. You need something that has tri on one side. See the 3 little holes? 3 little pins or whatever. And on the reverse side, that's got the plus, or the 4. I don't know if you guys can see that. But anyway, we're going to use this for take-up. Your take-up has 4. Your feed spool has 3. Sorry, I bumped the camera. So for that, we have to keep in mind that when you start your feed, you have the 3 hole or the 3 slot side. It's got to face down to fit this spindle right here. And you can see the design here, the little arrow design on how your film should go. So your film needs to come off the reel in sort of this number 9 pattern. You pop it in. You want to pull a little bit of film off. You pop it in. And you want to make sure there's some wind on your camera. You crank it up a little bit first. You follow this little line here. You want to come behind the pressure plate here and behind the lens, so in between the pressure plate and the lens. And you can kind of seat it. You can feel that seated all the way down and then straight up like this. Feed it onto your empty spool here. Now you want to make sure you have the 4 facing down. See the 4 here? Facing down. Roll it up a little bit, get a little wind to it. And you just seat it in there till it kind of pops in place. Just like that. Now see, our film is following the little diagram on the little plate down there. Now you want to pop the trigger a couple times. And look at that. It's running exactly the way it should. That's all there is to it. Now when this film runs through, it's running through this gate, but only half of this film is being exposed. So in other words, this side, it's actually the bottom. The bottom side is being exposed down here first. When you're completely done, everything's going to be oriented properly, because when you're done, you're going to take this reel out and you're going to turn it upside down, and you're going to repeat the same process, putting this one on the bottom. So when you've shot it twice, now this original take-up reel is again your original take-up reel. It will be empty again. And you want to keep the original one, if you can, with your camera. That's all there is to it. Let's take it back over there to Mike. That's all there is to it. Like I say, there isn't much to these little cameras, and they will produce pretty darn good results if you take your time with them. There's not a lot that can go wrong with them. You wind it up, you push the shutter button, it's either going to work or it's not. I don't know what else to say about it other than if you are a fan of film and you're looking for something entry level, these may be the choice for you. As far as the film, you can pick it up at the Film Photography Project. They sell the film. They also process and scan it if you want the whole package deal kind of deal. So check them out online if you're interested. But that's all I have for you with the Kodak Brownie regular 8, double 8, 8mm movie camera. If you enjoyed this video, I want you to do me a favor, please, if you would. Yep, just tap the like button. It helps the algorithm, the YouTube algorithm a tad, just a tad. If you enjoyed it, I mean, that's it. Maybe, if you would, consider subscribing. I would appreciate it. We do a lot of videos here. I do a live stream every week. I do found film, where we process old film that's never been seen by anyone except me. And until the very next time I see all of your beautiful faces, especially yours. That's the one. That's... Oh. I'll see all of you on the very next go-round.